My name is Delia Marsh. I'm 34 years old, and I want to tell you about the Christmas afternoon when a cheap DNA kit from a boutique holiday pop-up in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, dissolved the story I had been living inside of for my entire life. It happened in my mother's living room, the one with the cream carpet she's been protecting since 1998, the one with the wooden nativity scene on the mantel that she unwraps from tissue paper every December 1st, piece by piece, like it's something sacred. The one where my father used to fall asleep in his armchair on Christmas afternoon with the football on, and nobody turned it off because we all kind of liked the sound of it. My Aunt Rue was wearing a Christmas sweater with actual blinking lights on it. I remember that detail very clearly, the way it kept blinking in my peripheral vision while everything else in the room went completely still. My mother's hands were folded in her lap. The ham smell was still in the air, and Rue's phone was on the coffee table with an app open on the screen, and the loading bar was moving, and my mother was watching it the way you watch something you cannot stop. She already knew. Before a single result had loaded, before my brother Cole had made his first joke about it, before Rue had topped off her Prosecco, my mother already knew exactly what that screen was going to say. I could see it in the way she had gone still. Not nervous still, final still. The stillness of someone who has been waiting 34 years for a particular door to open and has just heard the handle turn. I need you to sit with me in that room for a minute, because what happened there changed everything I thought I understood about my own name. But first, if you just found this channel, or if you've been here a while and this is already hitting somewhere close, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss where this goes, and share it with someone who needs to hear a story about what gets kept and what gets hidden inside a family. I read your comments, I see you, and I want you here for all of it. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Cookeville, Tennessee, in a small brick ranch house at the edge of town. My parents were Patrice and Gary Marsh. My mother ran the house the way she ran everything, efficiently, cheerfully, with the kind of control that's so consistent you don't recognize it as control until you're older. Meals on the table at 6. Christmas cards out by December 1st. No raised voices in front of company. Not because we were pretending everything was fine, but because in my mother's framework, the performance of being fine was part of how you stayed fine. If you maintained the shape of a thing, the thing maintained itself. My father, Gary, was a regional sales rep. He was on the road 4 days a week, and when he was home, he was warm in a shallow way. The kind of warm that makes you feel held without making you feel known. He took pictures at my graduation. He drove me to college. He hugged me at the right moments. I loved him. I want to be clear about that. I loved him completely, and I did not know until I was 34 years old that love can be real and still be built on something that was decided without you. My brother Cole is 3 years younger than me and has my father's exact blue eyes and my father's exact build and my father's exact way of tilting his head when he's thinking about something. I noticed all of this my whole life, and it registered as nothing, the way things register as nothing when you don't yet have a reason to look. We were a normal family. We were a functional family. We were a family where things were managed so smoothly that it took a blinking Christmas sweater and a $39 DNA kit to reveal what had been managed most carefully of all. My Aunt Rue, my mother's younger sister, has been the unpredictable one her whole life. The one who laughed too loud and wore her hair too big and showed up to things slightly overdressed or slightly late or slightly both. She was never mean. She was never malicious. She was just a woman who had spent her life being treated as the less serious sister and had decided somewhere along the way to make that her whole personality. She bought the DNA kits as a joke. I want to be clear about that too because it matters to how I understand her. She brought them to Christmas in a boutique shopping bag with tissue paper, 4 slim white boxes, one for each adult, and she presented them with the theatrical delight of someone who had found the perfect gag gift. Ancestry DNA kits, she said, lifting them out one by one. I figured we should finally find out if we're actually related or just pretending. My brother laughed. His wife Amber said she'd already done one of these. Their 2-year-old Macy was in the corner industriously demolishing a pile of wrapping paper. I turned the box over in my hands and thought, mildly, that it might be interesting to know about the European breakdown, the Irish percentage, that kind of thing. My mother laughed too. It was a real laugh, in the sense that it was the laugh she uses when something requires a laugh. I have heard that laugh my entire life, and I have never once been able to tell the difference between it and the other one. That is how good she is. That is how long she practiced. Rue had already downloaded the companion app. She was photographing the QR codes on each kit with her phone, loading the preliminary profiles. "We can get matches in like 10 minutes, she said. "It's hilarious." "Rue," my mother said. One word, light tone. The tone she uses when she means something else entirely. "Come on," Rue said, and handed Cole his phone. "And this is the moment I want you to understand, because this is the moment where I first felt it, that specific thing you feel in your body before your brain has caught up. A change in atmospheric pressure, the feeling of a room tilting 1 degree in a direction it shouldn't." I watched my mother's face while Rue set up the app, and I saw the laugh leave it. Not dramatically, not in any way that Cole would have noticed, or Rue, or Amber. Just gone. Replaced by something I did not have a name for yet. She was sitting very still, hands in her lap, watching the loading bar on Rue's phone, and she looked like a woman who had just realized she had run out of time. There is a specific kind of pain that comes from watching someone you love realize they are about to lose something they have protected for a very long time. Even before you know what the thing is, even before you know what it cost them to keep it, even before you understand that the thing they were protecting was partly you, and partly themselves, and partly the version of your family that was real in all the ways that mattered, and a lie in one way that mattered enormously. That is what I felt, sitting in my mother's living room on Christmas afternoon, in my father's sweater, wearing my father's watch, watching my mother go still. The loading bar kept moving. Macy crinkled wrapping paper in the corner. Cole read the back of the box. And I watched my mother's hands fold and refold in her lap, and I thought, she already knows. She has always known. And today is the day she runs out of road. I didn't say anything. I just watched. Because watching is what I do when I don't yet know what I'm looking at, and need to know before I speak. It's something I've always done. My father used to say I had the patience of someone much older. He said it like it was a compliment. I believed him. I believed a lot of things about myself that were built on a foundation I had never been invited to examine. The loading bar hit 100%. And my mother stopped smiling. Cole's results came up first. The app flagged him as a strong match to my mother's profile. Full maternal link, clean and unambiguous. And on the paternal side, a solid cluster of matches consistent with the Marsh family line. My father's sister Linda had done an ancestry test 2 years back, apparently, and her profile was in the system. Cole's paternal matches traced straight to her. The app put a little green check mark next to the family cluster like it was grading him. 100% a Marsh, just like he'd said. He looked satisfied in the way Cole looks satisfied by things that confirm what he already believed. He handed the phone back to Rue. Rue was already pulling up the next profile. Mine. The preliminary results loaded in segments. The maternal link came through first. Full match to my mother. That part was fine. That part was what it should have been. And then the paternal side started populating, and I watched the screen, and where Cole's results had shown a clean cluster of Marsh family names, mine showed something different. A different cluster entirely. A different surname group. Appalachian. Centered in western North Carolina. No match to Linda. No match to the Marsh line at all. I stared at the screen for what felt like a long time, but was probably 4 seconds. Then I looked up at my mother, and she was not looking at the phone. She was looking at the middle distance, that specific point past the Christmas tree, past the window, past the yard, the place people look when they are doing final calculations on something they have been calculating for a very long time. Her hands were completely still in her lap now. She had stopped refolding them. She had arrived somewhere. "Mom," I said, just that. Cole took the phone from Rue's hand. I watched him look at it. I watched him look at my results, and then at his, and then back at mine. I watched the moment he understood what he was looking at. It took about 4 seconds for him, too. And then his face did something I have never seen it do before. It went careful. The way faces go careful when they are trying not to be the one who says the thing out loud. Rue looked at my mother. Her Jingle Bell earrings were perfectly still. The blinking Christmas sweater blinked. "Can we turn that thing off?" my mother said, not a question. And here is where I need to stop for just a second, because I know some of you watching this have sat in a room where someone said something in a tone that contained an entire conversation you were never supposed to have. Where the person who was supposed to protect you said something that revealed in the space of 5 words that there had been a door in your house this whole time that you didn't know existed. If you've ever been in that room, if you've ever felt the floor shift under a moment that looked completely ordinary from the outside, I want to ask you something, and I mean this genuinely. Leave it in the comments. Tell me what it felt like when you realized the thing you were looking at wasn't what you thought it was. I read every single one. Because I think a lot of people have been in that room and not had anyone to tell. The story continues. My mother did not deny it. That is the first thing I want to say about what happened next, and I want to say it clearly because I think it matters to how you understand her. She did not deny it. She did not perform confusion. She did not look at the screen and say, "That must be an error," the way I half expected her to, the way I think part of me was hoping she would so I could let her off the hook. She said, "I made a decision." Those 4 words, in that living room, with the ham smell still in the air and Macy crinkling paper in the corner. I made a decision. She said that Gary was my father in every way that mattered. She said it more than once. She said the word protect 3 times, once applied to Gary, once applied to me, once applied to the family, and I noticed that she never once said she did it for herself. Whether that was true or whether it was part of the management, I still don't entirely know. Did Dad know? I asked. The pause that followed was its own answer. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. But 3 seconds of silence in a room that has gone that still is a very long time. He suspected, she said finally. We decided not to pursue it. We decided. I want to sit with those 2 words for a moment, because they were the ones that hit me hardest. Not the DNA result. Not even the confirmation that the man I called my father might not have been. It was the we. It was the image of my parents, Gary and Patrice, who drove 4 hours to my college graduation and took pictures and were home by dinner. Sitting together somewhere, at some point, and deciding. Deciding to look at a child and say, ours. Deciding to fold the question shut and build a life on top of it. Deciding that the shape of the family mattered more than the foundation it was built on. Gary chose me. I need to hold that. Gary looked at a situation that could have gone 100 different directions and he chose me. Chose to be my father, chose the name, chose the watch he would eventually leave me, chose the sweater I was wearing on the exact afternoon the secret died. That is an act of love so large I cannot hold it in both hands without dropping something. And it is also a betrayal so complete that I am still, even now, learning the shape of it. I stood up. I took my coat from the hook by the door. I said, I need to drive. Cole said, Dell. I'll come back, I said, and I meant it. I just needed to be in motion before I could figure out what to do with any of what was sitting in my chest. The drive I took was 47 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when I left and again when I pulled into the gas station parking lot on Route 70, where I finally let the car idle and sat there with my hands in my lap. Not doing anything. Just sitting with the specific weight of 34 years of a story that had been told to me with something important left out. I cried in the parking lot. I hate crying the way I cried in that parking lot. Ugly, uncontrolled, the kind that makes your whole face hurt. I never cry like that on purpose. It just happened, the way things happen when you've been holding something at arm's length and your arms finally give out. I thought about my father, about the way he tilted his head when he was listening, about the way he smelled like cedar and Old Spice, and the specific brand of dryer sheets my mother has bought for 40 years. I thought about the watch on my wrist, which he had worn every workday for 22 years, and left me without a note, because Gary was not a note-writing man, because Gary communicated love through the objects he handed you, and the choices he made quietly, and the things he never once made you feel bad for not knowing. He suspected, and he never looked at me differently, not once in 34 years. I drove back to my mother's house. I don't know exactly when I decided to. It wasn't a decision so much as a direction my hands took on the wheel. When I walked back in, the living room had rearranged itself. Macy was asleep on the couch. Amber had taken her shoes off. Cole was at the end of the dining table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, looking at the wood grain. And Rue, who had brought the kits, who had downloaded the app, who had pushed when my mother said her name in that tone. Rue was sitting across from my mother at the kitchen table. No Prosecco, no jokes. The Christmas sweater lights had been turned off. She looked smaller than usual. She looked like a woman who had just understood, too late, exactly what she had done. She looked at me when I came in and said, "I knew there was something. I didn't know it was, I'm sorry, sweetheart." And then my mother said, "I have letters." I sat down. Because there are moments in your life when someone says something and your body makes the decision before your brain does. And my body sat down at that table because something in me recognized those words. Not the content of them, but the weight. The specific weight of something that has been held in a box in a closet for 34 years, waiting for the moment when the holding became more expensive than the telling. I sat down, and she got the box. It was a shoebox. Brown, unremarkable, the kind of box that holds a pair of sensible shoes and then gets repurposed for things that don't have anywhere else to go. She carried it from the back of the house with both hands, the way you carry something you've been carrying for a long time and have gotten very good at making look light. She put it on the kitchen table between us. She didn't open it. She put her hand flat on the lid and she said, "His name was Roland Hess. He was a good man. He passed away in 2019. He didn't know. I made sure he didn't know." The kitchen was very quiet. Cole had moved to the doorway without me noticing. Rue had her hands around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking from. "Why?" I said. "Not how or when or are you sure, just why?" "Because if he knew," my mother said, "there would have been a conversation. And in that conversation, everything would have changed. And I was not able to let everything change." I looked at her hands on the box, the same hands that packed my lunches for 12 years, that tied a bow on every birthday present with a specific double knot she learned from her own mother, that folded laundry and signed permission slips and gripped the steering wheel of the minivan every Sunday morning on the way to church, where she sat in the third pew from the front and sang hymns in a clear, precise alto that carried just far enough for the people around her to notice, without drawing attention to itself. "You let everything change today," I said. "No," she said. "Ruth Ann let everything change today." A pause. "I let it change 34 years ago. I just didn't tell you." And here is the thing that I did not expect. The thing that hit me harder than any of the rest of it. Harder than the DNA result, or the confirmation, or the box on the table. My mother was not asking for forgiveness. She was not performing remorse. She was not doing the thing she always did, which was manage the shape of a moment until it became something everyone could live with. For the first time in my life, she was speaking to me like one adult to another. Like someone who had made a choice and understood the cost of it and was not going to insult me by pretending the cost was smaller than it was. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. And it was the thing that broke me open in a way the DNA result hadn't, because the DNA result was information, but this was my mother. Finally, at 61 years old, in her kitchen on Christmas night, deciding to be real with me. She slid the box across the table. I picked it up. I want to tell you something before I go further, because this is the moment in the story that I have thought about more than any other. More than the confrontation, more than the results loading on Rue's phone, more than any of it. This is the moment that I think about when I am driving at night and the road is empty and my mind goes to the places it goes when nobody's watching. I was holding a shoebox that my mother had carried in the back of a closet for 34 years. Inside it were letters written by a man I had never met, to a woman who became my mother, about a thing that became my life. And in my left hand, on my wrist, was the watch of the man who had known, who had suspected, which is close enough to knowing, and chosen, every single morning for 34 years, to put on his shoes and come to the table anyway. If that is sitting inside you the way it sat inside me, if you felt something shift in your chest just now that you don't quite have a word for, hit that like button. Subscribe if you aren't already. It's a small thing, but you being here for this means more than I know how to say. Because I have never told this story out loud before. Not like this. And I need someone on the other side of it. I took the box home. I did not open it at my mother's kitchen table. I was not ready to read those letters in front of other people, even the people who already knew. I carried it to my car, put it in the passenger seat, buckled the seatbelt across it. I don't know why, it was automatic, it felt necessary, and I drove back to Nashville. The drive was an hour and 40 minutes of darkness and highway lights, and the radio off, and just the sound of the engine and my own breathing and the box in the seat beside me. I kept glancing at it the way you glance at something you're not ready to look at directly, like looking at the sun, like looking at something that has been in the dark for a very long time and might be different in the light than you imagined. I got home at 9:15. I made tea, not because I wanted tea, but because I needed something to do with my hands for the 4 minutes it takes the kettle to boil. I stood in my kitchen in my father's sweater, Gary's sweater. I was still calling it Gary's sweater. I am still calling it Gary's sweater. That is not going to change. And I looked at the box on my kitchen table and I thought, okay. I sat down and I opened it. The letters were tied with kitchen twine. That was the first detail that hit me. Kitchen twine. The domestic practicality of it. The way my mother had used the same twine she probably used to truss the Christmas ham to bind 34 years of something she could never send back and couldn't throw away. There were 11 letters. I counted them before I read any of them, spread across the table like I was organizing a case file, which is maybe the most Delia Marsh thing I could have done in that moment. The postmarks were from 1989 and 1990. Asheville, North Carolina. The return address was handwritten in the specific, careful cursive of a person who learned penmanship the old way and took it seriously. I picked up the first one. Roland Hess wrote the way people wrote letters in 1990, unhurried, paying attention, assuming the person on the other end had time to read slowly. He wrote about the light in the Blue Ridge in November, which he described as coming in sideways in the late afternoon and making everything look like something you should remember. He wrote about a conference he'd been to in Asheville. He wrote about a woman he'd met there who laughed at something he said, a small thing, an offhand thing, and made him feel, he wrote, like himself again. He was writing about my mother. He wrote about her in the way you write about someone when you are very careful about every word, because you are aware that the words are the only thing you have, and you want to use them exactly right. He did not write dramatically. He did not write with the urgency of someone conducting an affair, which I think I had been bracing for without knowing it. He wrote like someone who had found something unexpected in a place he hadn't expected to find it, and was trying to be honest about what that meant, without being reckless about it. He never knew about me. He wrote 11 letters, and in none of them did he know about me. My mother had already made her decision by the time the first letter arrived. She kept them, all 11 in chronological order, bound with kitchen twine, and she never replied to any of them after the 8th. The last 3 letters from Roland Hess were shorter, more careful. The last one said simply that he understood, that he wished her well, and that he hoped she was happy. That was 1990. I was born in 1991. I sat at my kitchen table and read all 11 letters twice. My tea went cold. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet the way neighborhoods are quiet on Christmas night. That specific stillness of a holiday that has finished happening. I could hear the refrigerator. I could hear the clock above the stove. I could hear, very faintly, the sound of my own breathing. Roland Hess passed away in 2019. My mother told me that. He never knew. He wrote 11 letters to a woman he met at a conference, and in the last one he wished her well, and then he lived the rest of his life without ever knowing that there was a person in the world who got her gray-green eyes and her way of watching a room from him. I thought about that for a long time. Then I thought about Gary getting up at 5:30 every weekday morning to make coffee before the drive to work. About Gary at my college graduation with the camera. About Gary leaving me the watch without a note because Gary communicated in objects and choices and the specific quiet of a man who decides something and does not feel the need to announce it. He decided I was his. Every single day for 34 years he decided I was his. I closed the box. I did not close it the way you close something you're done with. I closed it the way you close something you're going to need to come back to. I put it on the shelf in my bedroom, between the copy of the book I've been meaning to finish for 6 months, and the photograph of me and Cole at the lake when I was 8 and he was 5, and we were both squinting into the sun, and neither of us knew anything. I made fresh tea. I sat back down. And something in the room, something in me, had changed in a way I didn't have a word for yet. Not better, not worse, not resolved, just different. Like a window had been opened in a room that had been sealed for a very long time, and the air coming through it was cold, but it was air. I was not broken. I was, if anything, more. The days after Christmas have a specific texture. The decorations are still up, but the reason for them is over. The food is mostly gone. The house feels like a stage set after the performance has ended. Everything still in place, slightly emptied out. I spent the 26th alone in my apartment, which was exactly what I needed. I went for a walk in the morning without my phone. I made soup from scratch in the afternoon, the kind that takes 3 hours and makes the whole place smell like something good is happening, which it was, in a quiet way that had nothing to do with anyone else. Cole called at 4. He called because Cole is a man who processes slowly and honestly and doesn't say anything until he knows what he means. And by 4 o'clock on December 26th, he had figured out what he meant. "I don't know what to say," he said. "I've been trying to figure out what to say since yesterday, and I genuinely don't know." "You don't have to say anything," I told him. "I know," he said, "but I want to." There was a pause, the kind Cole is comfortable with in a way most people aren't. "He was your dad," Cole said finally. "Whatever that thing said, he was your dad and he knew it." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Yeah," I said, "he did." We stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes without talking about it again. He told me about Macy getting into the Christmas cookies at 6 in the morning. I told him about the soup. At the end, he said, "Call me whenever," and I said I will, and we both meant it in the specific way that people mean things when something has happened that reminded them what means something. I want to tell you what happened to my mother, not because it is satisfying. It isn't, not exactly, but because it is true, and the truth of it is complicated in the way that most true things about families are complicated. My mother didn't fall apart after Christmas. That is not who she is. She went to church on Sunday. She sent her January newsletter to the women's group. She took down the nativity scene on January 2nd, piece by piece, wrapped each figure in tissue paper, placed them back in the box with the same careful order she uses every year. She functioned. She has always functioned. Functioning is what she knows how to do when everything else is unclear. But something shifted in how she was seen. Not dramatically, not publicly. Just the specific way that things shift in small towns when the people who know you well enough to read between the lines start reading between different lines. Rue had not told anyone. Cole had not told anyone. But my mother knew that secrets have a physics. They don't disappear. They redistribute, they settle into the people who carry them, and change the weight those people carry everywhere they go. She called me in the second week of January. She said, "I want to see you." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I want to be clear about that. I'm asking for the chance to know you the way I should have been knowing you." I sat with that for a long moment. "That's going to take some time," I said. "I know," she said. "I have time." I believed her. Not completely, not yet, but enough to say I'll come in February, and then actually go in February. We sat at the kitchen table, the same chairs, and she made coffee, and I brought a coffee cake from the bakery near my apartment, and we talked for 3 hours about things we had never talked about before. Not the secret specifically, just real things, hard things, the kind of things you can finally talk about when the management system has been dismantled. It was not a reconciliation. It was the beginning of a possible one. There is a difference, and I am old enough to know it. Rue came by that day too, near the end. She knocked and stood in the doorway with her coat still on, not sure if she was welcome, and I told her to sit down and take her coat off, and she did. She apologized in the specific way Rue apologizes, all at once, completely sincerely, slightly too much. I told her she had done something she didn't understand the weight of. She said she knew. I told her that didn't make it okay. She said she knew that too. You also, I said, accidentally gave me something I needed. She looked at me for a second. The letters, I said. She nodded slowly. Then she said, Was he a good person? Yeah, I said. I think he was. She pressed her lips together and looked at the table. Good, she said. That's good. Rue is not someone who will ever be a simple figure in my life. She is the person who brought the thing that broke everything, and also the person who sat across from my mother in that kitchen, with her sweater lights turned off, and didn't leave. Those two things are both true, and I am learning to hold them both without needing to resolve them into one. There is something I wrote, in the 3rd week of January, sitting at my kitchen table with the box open in front of me, and the 11 letters laid out the way I'd laid them out the first time. I wasn't writing to anyone specifically. I was writing for myself, the way I sometimes do when I need to understand something and talking about it out loud won't get me there. I wrote, The people who chose me knew something I didn't. They knew the choice was a choice. And they made it anyway, every day, in the small ways that are the only ways that actually count. Gary drove me to soccer practice for 6 years. He sat in the rain on a metal bleacher for 6 years. He fell asleep during my college graduation speech. Not my graduation, the commencement speaker's speech. He was awake for mine, he told me later. He said he'd been awake for mine, and took pictures and was home by dinner. He chose me in the way that you choose someone when you don't make announcements about it, when you just show up. That is what I want to remember. Not the secret, not the letters, not the loading bar and the blinking sweater and my mother's hands going still. I want to remember that Gary Marsh woke up every morning for 34 years and decided without fanfare that I was his. And that somewhere in western North Carolina, a man named Roland Hess wrote 11 careful letters to a woman he met at a conference, and wished her well, and never knew that the best thing he never knew about was living in Nashville wearing her gray-green eyes. I am 34 years old. I know more about who I am now than I did 3 months ago, which sounds like it should feel like a subtraction, but mostly feels like an expansion. Like the edges of myself got pushed out a little. Like I have more room than I thought. The box is still on the shelf in my bedroom. I haven't moved it. I take it down sometimes and read a letter or two. Not all of them at once anymore, just one. The way you read something when you're not trying to understand it all at once, but just trying to stay in contact with it. The one I come back to most is not the last one. It's the 4th one, where Roland writes about the Blue Ridge light in November, coming in sideways in the late afternoon, making everything look like something you should remember. I think about that light. I think about a man who paid attention to light that way, who described it that way, who thought it was worth writing down. And I think, okay, there you are. On a Tuesday evening in February, I put on Gary's sweater and I drove out of Nashville on Route 70, not going anywhere specific, just driving the way I drive when I need to be in motion. I went as far as the county line, and then I turned around and came back. The roads were empty. The sky was that specific winter dark that feels close, like a low ceiling. I had the radio off. I thought about Gary in his armchair at Christmas, asleep with the football on, and all of us leaving the sound on because we liked it. I thought about my mother's hands on the box. I thought about Cole's hand on mine at that kitchen table, not saying anything, just there. I thought about the light in November coming in sideways. My name is Delia Marsh. I am 34 years old, and I finally understand that the story of who I am was not a lie. It was just bigger than the version I'd been given, and I am still, slowly, learning its edges. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Has anyone ever made a choice on your behalf, quietly, without telling you? A choice that cost them something, that you only found out about later, that changed how you understood their love? Leave it in the comments. I mean that. I read every single one and I want to know. If this story stayed with you, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Share it with someone who grew up in a family where things were managed more than they were said. Someone who might need to hear that the version of themselves built on an incomplete story is still real, is still theirs, is still enough. I'll see you in the next one.